Most men believe that the way to keep a woman's attention is to give her more attention, more messages, more explanations, more availability, more reassurance. They assume that the more they show up, the more important they become in her eyes. But human psychology often works in the opposite direction. The more predictable you become, the less attention people pay to your presence. When someone knows they can access you whenever they want, your attention slowly stops feeling valuable. It becomes expected, and whatever becomes expected eventually loses its impact. This is where the dark psychology of ignoring a woman begins, not as a game, not as manipulation, but as an understanding of human nature. People notice what changes. People notice what disappears. People notice what is no longer guaranteed. Imagine a man who is always available. Every message gets an instant reply. Every moment of silence makes him nervous. Every small change in behavior forces him to seek answers. Over time, he communicates something without realizing it. He communicates that his attention is unlimited, and unlimited things rarely feel valuable. Now imagine the opposite. A man who has goals, a man who has purpose, a man who does not abandon his priorities every time emotions appear. When he gives attention, it feels intentional. When he is silent, it is not because he is playing games. It is because his life does not revolve around another person's reactions. That difference changes everything, because attention becomes meaningful when it is given by choice rather than need. Human beings are naturally curious about changes in behavior. When someone who is always available suddenly becomes focused on their own life, people notice. Questions begin appearing. What changed? Why is he different? Where is his attention now? And the moment curiosity appears, attention follows. This is why constant pursuit often weakens attraction, while emotional self-control strengthens it. The more desperately someone seeks attention, the less valuable that attention appears. The more someone values their own time and energy, the more others begin valuing it too. The irony is that most men lose respect, not because they care too much, but because they make caring their entire identity. They stop focusing on growth. They stop focusing on purpose. They stop focusing on themselves. Their attention becomes completely dependent on another person's response. And dependency always weakens influence. The strongest position is never making someone miss you. The strongest position is becoming so focused on your own growth that your attention is no longer available on demand. Because when silence comes from self-respect instead of insecurity, it creates something far more powerful than words ever could. It creates curiosity. And curiosity is where the real psychology of silence begins. Once attention is no longer given freely, something interesting begins to happen. The constant noise disappears, and in its place, curiosity starts to grow. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of human psychology. Most people believe attention creates value. In reality, attention creates value only when it is balanced. When attention becomes endless, predictable, and guaranteed, it often loses the very impact it was supposed to create. Think about how human nature works. People rarely spend much time thinking about what they fully understand. They think about what they cannot fully predict. They think about what feels uncertain. They think about what raises questions in their minds. This is why mystery has always been powerful, not because mystery is manipulation, but because mystery activates curiosity, and curiosity captures attention. When a man constantly explains himself, constantly updates someone about everything he is doing, and constantly seeks reassurance, there is very little left to discover. Every thought is revealed. Every emotion is exposed. Every reaction becomes predictable. Over time, the interaction loses tension, and without tension, curiosity fades. Now compare that to someone who remains calm, focused, and emotionally controlled. He is not trying to create mystery. He is simply living his life. He is focused on his goals. He is focused on his purpose. He is not constantly seeking validation through communication. As a result, there are gaps, and the human mind naturally fills gaps. People begin wondering what he is thinking. People begin wondering what has his attention. People begin wondering why he seems different. The more someone tries to force attention, the less natural it becomes. The more someone focuses on themselves, the more naturally attention often follows. This is the paradox that many people never understand. The strongest presence is often created by what is not said. Think about conversations. Sometimes a single moment of silence creates more impact than 10 minutes of talking. Why? Because silence forces reflection. Silence creates space. Silence allows the other person to think rather than simply react. Most people are uncomfortable with silence because they believe they must constantly fill it. They believe every pause needs an explanation. Every misunderstanding requires a defense. Every emotional moment requires immediate action. But emotionally strong individuals understand something different. They understand that not every feeling requires a reaction. Not every situation requires a response. Not every silence needs to be broken. This self-control creates an entirely different energy. It communicates confidence. It communicates patience. It communicates that your emotional state is not dependent on immediate validation. And that is rare. Human beings are drawn toward people who appear comfortable with themselves. When someone is constantly chasing attention, they communicate need. When someone remains focused on their own path, they communicate value. The difference is subtle but powerful because people tend to respect what appears self-sufficient more than what appears desperate for approval. This is why silence becomes such a powerful part of emotional control. It is not about ignoring someone to provoke a reaction. It is about refusing to let every emotion dictate your behavior. It is about remaining centered when others become reactive. It is about understanding that your value does not increase because you are constantly available. And once curiosity begins replacing predictability, another shift occurs. People start paying closer attention, not because you demanded it, but because absence and emotional control naturally cause them to reevaluate the value of what is no longer constantly present. Curiosity may capture attention, but curiosity alone is not enough to create lasting respect. Eventually, every interaction reaches a point where emotions become involved, expectations appear, disappointments happen, misunderstandings occur, and this is where most people reveal their level of emotional maturity. The average person reacts. They react to every message. They react to every delay. They react to every change in behavior. They react to every emotion that passes through their mind. And because they react so quickly, they often lose control of the situation. This is why emotional control is one of the rarest forms of power, not because it allows you to control others, but because it prevents others from controlling you. Think about how many people destroy their own position simply because they cannot manage their emotions. A single moment of frustration causes them to say things they regret. A moment of insecurity causes them to seek reassurance they do not actually need. A moment of jealousy causes them to act impulsively. The emotion itself is not the problem. The lack of control is human nature respects stability. People naturally trust individuals who remain calm under pressure more than those who become emotional at every challenge. Why? Because emotional stability communicates confidence. It communicates self-respect. It communicates that your inner state is not dependent on external circumstances. This is where the art of silence becomes so powerful. Silence is often misunderstood as weakness. In reality, silence frequently requires more strength than speaking. Anyone can react, anyone can defend themselves, anyone can explain their emotions in the heat of the moment. But remaining calm when emotions demand a reaction requires discipline. And discipline always creates power. Imagine a situation where expectations are not being met. Most people immediately seek answers. They want certainty. They want reassurance. They want the discomfort to disappear as quickly as possible. But emotionally strong individuals understand something important. Not every uncomfortable feeling needs immediate action. Sometimes emotions need observation before reaction. Sometimes silence creates clarity. Sometimes distance allows perspective. The problem with impulsive behavior is that it often serves temporary emotions rather than long-term interests. What feels urgent in one moment may appear completely unnecessary a day later. This is why emotional control protects you from yourself. It creates space between feeling and action. It allows wisdom to enter where impulse would normally take over. and this changes how people perceive you. When someone notices that you do not react to every emotional trigger, they begin seeing you differently. You appear more grounded, more centered, more confident. Not because you are pretending to be strong, but because your emotions no longer dictate your behavior. This quality is increasingly rare in a world where people are encouraged to react instantly to everything. The truth is that constant emotional expression does not always communicate strength. Sometimes it communicates dependence. Sometimes it communicates insecurity. Sometimes it communicates a need for validation. But emotional control communicates something far more powerful. It communicates self-possession. It communicates that your peace of mind belongs to you. And when your emotional state belongs to you, other people lose the ability to easily influence it. That is why the strongest individuals are not those who never feel disappointment, uncertainty, or frustration. They are the ones who experience those emotions without becoming controlled by them, because the real power of silence is not what it does to other people. The real power of silence is what it does to you. It teaches patience. It teaches discipline. It teaches self-respect. And once you develop that level of emotional control, something remarkable begins to happen. People start viewing your presence differently, because what is calm, controlled, and not constantly available often appears far more valuable than what is always there. As emotional control grows, another powerful psychological principle begins to reveal itself. People rarely appreciate something when they are certain it will always be there. Certainty creates comfort, but comfort often reduces awareness. This is why many relationships, friendships, and connections slowly lose intensity over time. Not because people stop caring, but because they stop noticing. Human nature has a strange tendency. People often recognize value most clearly when they experience absence, not permanent absence, not emotional games. But the absence that naturally occurs when someone becomes focused on their own life, most people spend so much energy trying to stay present in someone's mind that they never give that person a chance to miss their presence. They constantly communicate, constantly explain, constantly seek reassurance. They become so available that their attention starts feeling ordinary, and whatever feels ordinary is often taken for granted. Think about how people react when something familiar suddenly changes. The moment a routine disappears, people notice. The moment a familiar presence becomes less frequent, people notice. The moment attention is no longer guaranteed, people notice. Why? Because absence creates perspective. When someone is constantly present, their value can become invisible through familiarity. But when space appears, the mind begins reflecting on what that presence actually meant. This is not manipulation, it is psychology. People evaluate value more carefully when they have the opportunity to compare presence with absence. Imagine a man whose entire life revolves around one person. Every decision, every thought, and every priority becomes centered around maintaining attention. Over time, he unintentionally communicates that his world depends on another person's response. Now imagine a different man. He cares. He values the connection, but he also values his own purpose. He has goals. He has ambitions. He has responsibilities beyond the relationship. As a result, his attention is balanced. His life continues moving forward, whether attention is received or not. This creates a completely different dynamic because his presence feels intentional rather than constant. And intentional attention always carries more value than unlimited attention. One of the greatest mistakes people make is believing that becoming more available automatically increases their importance. In reality, importance often comes from the quality of presence, not the quantity of it. Someone can give endless attention and still be overlooked. Someone else can give balanced, meaningful attention and leave a lasting impression. The difference lies in perception. Human beings naturally value what appears connected to purpose. When someone is constantly chasing attention, they communicate need. When someone remains committed to their goals, they communicate self-respect, and self-respect changes how others see you. The irony is that people often gain more respect when they stop trying to force it. They gain more appreciation when they stop demanding it. They gain more value when they stop proving it, because value becomes most visible when it stands on its own. This is why absence can be so powerful. It gives people time to reflect. It gives people time to compare. It gives people time to recognize what they may have overlooked when everything felt predictable. But the deeper lesson is not about making someone miss you. The deeper lesson is about building a life so meaningful that your attention naturally becomes valuable. Because when your focus shifts from chasing validation to pursuing purpose, people begin seeing you differently. And that realization leads to the most important transformation of all, the moment you stop seeking your worth from another person's approval and start building unshakable self-respect from within. After understanding the power of absence, a deeper lesson begins to emerge. The real purpose of silence is not to make someone think about you. The real purpose of silence is to stop thinking that your value depends on someone else's attention. This is where most people become trapped. They spend years chasing validation without realizing it. Every message becomes a test. Every response becomes a measurement. Every interaction becomes proof of whether they are important or not. Slowly, their self-worth becomes connected to another person's behavior. And that is one of the most dangerous positions anyone can place themselves in. Because the moment your confidence depends on someone else's approval, you hand them power they never earned. Think about how many people change themselves just to be accepted. They change their opinions, they change their priorities, they change their boundaries. They become whoever they think the other person wants them to be. At first, it feels like connection, but over time, it becomes dependence. They stop asking, "What do I want?" and start asking, "What will make them stay?" That question quietly destroys self-respect, because self-respect requires honesty, it requires authenticity, it requires the courage to remain yourself, even when approval is uncertain. The dark psychology behind silence is not that it makes people chase you. The deeper psychology is that it forces you to confront your dependence on validation. When communication slows down, many people become uncomfortable. Not because something is wrong, but because they suddenly realize how much reassurance they were receiving from another person. Without that reassurance, insecurity appears, fear appears, doubt appears. And this is where growth begins, because instead of running toward more validation, you have an opportunity to build something stronger. You have an opportunity to build self-respect. Self-respect is different from confidence. Confidence often comes from success. Self-respect comes from standards. It comes from knowing your worth even when nobody is applauding you. It comes from maintaining your values even when approval is unavailable. It comes from refusing to abandon yourself in order to keep someone else's attention. Most people never reach this point because they are too busy seeking external confirmation. They want everyone to like them, everyone to understand them, everyone to approve of them. But that is an impossible goal. No matter who you are, someone will misunderstand you, someone will reject you, someone will lose interest, someone will leave. And if your happiness depends on preventing those things, you will spend your life exhausted. Emotionally strong people understand a different truth. Their value does not increase when someone chooses them. Their value does not decrease when someone leaves. Their value exists independently of both outcomes. This mindset changes everything, because once you stop chasing validation, your behavior becomes more natural. You stop forcing conversations. You stop over-explaining yourself. You stop seeking reassurance where none is needed. You stop treating another person's attention as proof of your worth. And ironically, that is when you often become more respected, not because you are trying harder, but because you are finally acting from self-respect instead of insecurity. There is something powerful about a person who values themselves regardless of who stays and who leaves. They move differently. They speak differently. They make decisions differently. Their actions are guided by principles rather than fear. And that is where true emotional independence begins. Because once your self-worth is no longer tied to another person's approval, you become far more difficult to manipulate, and you start discovering the ultimate lesson behind silence. Not control over someone else, but complete control over yourself. Everything we have discussed leads to one final realization. Most people misunderstand power. They think power means controlling other people. They think power means making someone chase them. They think power means influencing emotions, creating attraction, or becoming impossible to ignore. But real power is something much deeper. Real power is control over yourself. Because if another person's behavior can determine your mood, they control you. If another person's attention determines your confidence, they control you. If another person's approval determines your self-worth, they control you. And the truth is that most people live this way without realizing it. Their happiness rises and falls based on how they are treated. Their confidence rises and falls based on how much attention they receive. Their peace rises and falls based on another person's actions. That is not power. That is dependence. The art of silence was never about controlling someone else. It was always about reclaiming control over yourself. Think about how much energy people waste trying to manage other people's emotions. They want everyone to understand them. They want everyone to appreciate them. They want everyone to respond exactly as they expect. But no matter how hard you try, you cannot control another human being. You cannot control their feelings. You cannot control their choices. You cannot control their priorities. You cannot control whether they stay or leave. The more you try, the more frustrated you become, because you are fighting a battle that can never truly be won. The moment you accept this reality, a strange freedom appears. You stop trying to control outcomes. You start controlling yourself. You stop obsessing over what someone else is doing. You start focusing on what you are doing. You stop chasing certainty. You start building stability within yourself. And that changes everything, because emotional mastery is not about suppressing feelings. It is about refusing to become a prisoner of them. You still feel disappointment. You still feel attraction. You still feel uncertainty. You still feel loss. But those emotions no longer dictate your behavior. They no longer control your decisions. They no longer define your identity. Instead, they become experiences that pass through you rather than forces that dominate you. This is why emotionally disciplined people appear so different. They are not necessarily smarter. They are not necessarily stronger. They simply understand where true power comes from. It comes from self-command. It comes from discipline. It comes from remaining centered when circumstances become chaotic. Most people spend years trying to master other people while completely neglecting themselves. But the individual who masters himself gains something far more valuable. He gains freedom, freedom from constant validation, freedom from emotional dependency, freedom from the fear of rejection, freedom from the need to explain himself to everyone. And freedom is one of the rarest forms of power in the modern world. Because once your peace of mind no longer depends on another person's attention, you become difficult to manipulate. Once your confidence no longer depends on another person's approval, you become difficult to control. Once your self-worth no longer depends on another person's presence, you become emotionally independent. That is the ultimate lesson behind silence. Not making someone miss you, not making someone chase you, not making someone think about you, but becoming so emotionally grounded that your happiness, confidence, and peace are no longer held hostage by anyone else's behavior. And when you reach that level of self-mastery, something remarkable happens. You stop using silence as a strategy and start living it as a reflection of your strength. Because the person who has mastered their emotions respects their own value and remains calm regardless of who stays or leaves, possesses a power that no one can take away.